Thank you, Angus, and good morning. I think it's still good morning. Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm from Swansea University. We lead the Tea at Sunrise project, which provides leadership to the Next Generation Solar Challenge. I'm going to take a slightly different tack to the other presentations, knowing that we're going into a panel discussion around ethics. I'm going to use sort of ethics to kind of frame what I'll talk about with Next Generation Solar. I'm hoping it will give many of you a little bit more insights into what it is we're talking about when we talk about Next Generation Solar. I've sort of channeled my inner Jim Morrison by calling it break on through to a better side. So the first ethical point that I think most people are familiar with around production of silicon PV modules is around human rights, and particularly associated with the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in China. This is an area where a lot of the material that goes into making silicon modules comes from. The image on the right shows the various steps in the supply chain of silicon modules, through from the quartz, the mined quartz, right through to the finished modules. The coloured ellipse there highlights the parts of the process that are most tainted with these human rights issues. Those are in the raw material production, the coal mining and the power that's needed. A lot of these plants exist in this location because there's plentiful quartz, there's plentiful coal. Also then the solar grade polysilicon is made there. You're also starting to see that aluminium smelters are in the same location using those same coal plants, and again those are also associated with some of the human rights issues, and we're even starting to see glass manufacturers moving in there as well. Now it's not a static situation, things are changing. The solar industry has recognised this and is starting to move polysilicon manufacture to other parts of the world, and for the most part I think that'll be a good thing. But I've just got a comment there about, beyond the Uyghur region. I met a Professor Nikita Sud at Oxford University last year whose work focuses on what she terms sand grabs. So not land grabs, but where sand is used either for construction, it can be used for manufacture of glass, and we're starting to see people being forcibly displaced from their homes to enable manufacturing of photovoltaic modules. Now, I feel if we're trying to address rising sea levels and mitigate that with technology such as solar energy, if we're ripping out the sand from underneath people's feet, we're making a pretty big mistake. So I think we want to be aware of some of the other things that are happening as we look sort of beyond the Uyghur population. In terms of critical raw materials, the image on the right shows some of the technologies we've already talked about and how critical raw materials is a key part of that. I think many of us would be familiar with a lot of the issues of mining and extraction of them and where the value becomes added and dealing with them at the end of life. Solar's perhaps not as bad as some of the other sectors, but there's a number of materials here that are shown. I mean, there's 4 highlighted in the periodic table there that are used in solar that are very, very low recycling rates currently. Some of these, if they leach into the environment at end of life, is a problem as well. A lot of tellurium is used in making cadmium telluride modules, such as First Solar make. The big one for silicon modules is the silver content. I mean, it's 15% here. This slide's already out of date. As PV production goes up globally, the amount of silver goes up. So that's really going to become a bottleneck. That then leads on to managing waste. Solar modules are pretty difficult things to recycle in lots of places. I know of one company in California that does have a process. They're just emerging with a process for manufacturing modules, but they need to collect modules and move them back to California for that to take place. Most modules, I mean, worst case here, things maybe get burnt like other electronic waste. They just end up in landfill. That happens in the UK as well. Best case we know of in Africa at the moment, my colleague Carol is there, alongside Anne Wachira Wambugu, who I think Leslie mentioned earlier, at a facility called E-Waste Africa, just north of Durban, where they take modules and then they grind them up and make paving blocks. Now that's better obviously than them end up in landfill, but it's a bit of a downgrading of a PV module if we're just going to park our cars on them. So, it is a concern. Energy, I mentioned coal before. These are satellite images here of solar polysilicon manufacture in China. And what you can see here is they're co-located with open cast coal mines, coal-fired power stations, and all of that is then feeding the production of the polysilicon. On one of the images, you also have an aluminium smelter there. Now, the impact of this then really hits through into the CO2 payback. The table shows a couple of different scenarios. I mean, one of them shows if you're manufacturing with very high CO2 content and then deploying into regions where you've got a low CO2 grid, the energy payback is really, the CO2 payback, sorry, is very long. It's almost 10 years. We want to go the other way around. We want to be making solar panels with low carbon energy and deploying it where it can have the most impact. And the difference then, you come down to less than a year carbon payback. So I'm going to go through why next generation solar sort of addresses those. I'm going through in reverse order. The first one, if we look at energy payback, this is some work done by Sam Stranks, he's a professor at Cambridge, who's part of our leadership group for next generation solar. And he's looked at a variety of technologies, and he's then looked at the energy payback time. So not exactly the same as the carbon payback, but closely related. And for silicon, best case for silicon, if it's recycled, if it can be recycled, we're down to 1.3 years energy payback. But if we look to the far right and we look at some of these next generation technologies, printed perovskite, and that's the one I really sort of talk about sort of more today, we're down at 0.09. We're more than an order of magnitude better than the best that can be done with silicon. And it's because there is no need for high temperature processes. There's not the energy that goes into it. These are quite simple printing processes. The other part of it is we want to think about the end of life. We don't want these to go to waste. Some of the materials in next generation solar still are of environmental concern. The two images sort of further right here is work we undertake at Swansea, where we can print these modules, and at the end of life, we can extract the materials off them. So we can dissolve them in solvents, extract all the materials, filtrate that out, and use those materials and then remake modules. So we're not making paving blocks from these modules, we're remanufacturing the same product. So we're talking about next generation solar, but can have first, second, third generations using the same materials. Clear advantages then to the environment from doing that. It also then brings down the energy payback time even further. We get down into just a few months if we can do this. And then if we look at material availability, we're working with earth-abundant materials. I've shown one particular stack that we focus on in Swansea. There are multiple ways you can make a next-generation solar module. We favour an approach that uses earth-abundant materials. We use carbon as the conductor rather than using copper or silver or gold. All of these materials can be screen printed. Some of the large image shows some work done by one of our PhD students, Favour, who's 3 months in, and she's already mapped the materials availability for this stack across Africa. And East Africa, West Africa, South Africa, these materials are abundant. We're starting to look at then the trade agreements between these nations as well to see that, is it feasible that these materials can be moved around and there could be manufacturing. And then in terms of local employment, the two images of the people working here, they're working with screen printers. Some of you may be familiar with that. We had a Newton project a few years ago where we went over to Mexico and we worked with a Mexican university. We also worked with a local t-shirt printer. Now they screen print onto t-shirts. And these people here showing with these screen printers, they are the t-shirt printing people. Some of our academics went over and they showed them how we would do that with perovskite materials. And they were able to make these 3 mini modules. They're quite small, but they're multiple cell modules shown here using the screen printing techniques that they had for the t-shirt printers with the people making them. So, these are transferable skills that are widely available. We're talking about low capital, CapEx equipment. So we can then create designs that enable not only manufacture locally, but also remanufacture locally. And we believe that this will give real opportunities around inclusive local employment. So, looking beyond, say, maybe the distribution, but all the way through the manufacturing and the end of life or the remanufacturing of the modules. So I think I should sort of leave it with this one. I mean, we've got skills and workforce there that could do this. The materials are available, certainly in Africa. We will be looking into other sort of T areas as well. We can embed a circular economy into these processes. The modest energy requirements mean that this can be done without using coal-fired power stations. There's low capex, so potentially it's attractive to investment to actually get this started at a relatively small scale. The quote there again comes from Professor Stranks at Cambridge. Some other work that he did looked at the potential for manufacturing perovskites using some of these printed techniques in a number of different low and middle income countries. And his conclusion was that at a much smaller scale, I think it even went down to a size of 7 megawatt manufacturing capacity, could be competitive in 71 out of 80 LMICs. Now that's compared to typically with silicon, you're talking gigawatts needed to make it economically viable. So much more local manufacture serving local markets, appears to be something that may be possible. So all of that together, I mean, we've got at the bottom there just in bold, this is how we term the next generation solar ed and challenge new locally manufactured solar PV supplies, reducing the costs of solar expansion. And I've just sort of put at the bottom of there, one of our targets over the next 12 months is with a partner in Nigeria to be able to make the first perovskite solar-based panel in Africa. So that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was a great presentation, and you've scratched my geek itch as well with your periodic table stuff and Jim Morrison references. All very good.